We had been thinking about this trip for a long time. I didn't want anything to go wrong, and by God, we were going to make it.
Well, I got married just about 3 years ago to John Hanna. And we decided to go on a honeymoon. I'd never been on a honeymoon before, but he kind of wanted to relive some of his childhood adventures, so we went down to Juneau.
I grew up in Juneau, and one time my uncle and my father and I, we went bear hunting on the same trip that we took, that Mary and I were planning. And it was nice, and surprisingly, when we were down there before, about over 40 years ago, it was sun shining and it was very pretty down there. But once we got down there, as I'll tell you, things changed a little bit.
We rented a cabin out off of Stevens Passage and Seymour Canal, and we had to hike into the cabin and that. We rented a boat from a relative of his, and unbeknownst to us, the boat had some issues that we weren't really aware of until we were on the water. And it was a very, very, very small boat. And we barely got our stuff in there. And I remember the night before we left, I said, "Are we going to be okay, John?" And he said, "Well, we'll say a little prayer together." And then I knew that
It was a Lund boat, but I had pretty much confidence in the Lund boats just because I've seen a lot of Lund boats, all over Southeast, and so I thought they must be pretty efficient and pretty good and safe. Well, when we got down there, the boat was a little smaller than most Lund boats, and it had pit liner spray like you have in the back of your vehicle sprayed on the bottom. That should have been my first indication something may have been wrong. And we launched the boat, and sure enough, we found out what the pit liner spray in the bottom of the boat was for. It was for a big patch, and water was coming out through the patch all over. But luckily, there was an automatic bilge pump in there, so that gave me a little more confidence about it. And we did take along a radio that we could listen to the forecasts and the seas and how large they were. Going over, I thought 2-foot seas weren't that bad. When we got to Stevens Passage, 2-foot seas are a little bit big. And it took a while to get over across just because, and I had to have Mary sit up in the front of the bow to keep the bow down because of the chop going over the waves, and I had to quarter the waves. But we got over there. And of course, we had to sit there and wait for the tide to come in so we could get up Oliver's Inlet.
we did a beeline straight across and got over to Oliver's Inlet. And at this time, the tide was going down, so we couldn't go up the inlet to get into where the cabin was. And so we did some fishing, and John got a halibut. That was kind of fun.
Every 7 or 8 minutes, we had to bail the boat out, because when you're just drifting halibut fishing, you're not running the motor, so the motor's not charging up the battery, and the automatic bilge pump would wear the battery down, and I was worried about that a little bit. And so we had to bail it. Now, this is not a little bailing bucket. This was a 5-gallon bailing bucket we were using. It was taking on every minute probably 8 or 9 gallons of water. And in that little boat, that was a lot of water.
Tide came in, and we made our way down Oliver's Inlet to Seymour Canal. And from there, we parked the boat and took all our junk out, and there was like a little rail belt that you could haul all your stuff. It was about a mile to the cabin, but the boat kept taking on water.
And we got up there, and things did change a little bit. The railroad track did not go down to the beach anymore. You couldn't put your boat on it. And so what we ended up doing is we could not put the boat on the track to get it up over to Seymour Canal, so we were going to leave it there. And the tide was going out at that time, over a period of time, so that wasn't bad. We loaded all our stuff onto the cart, and then we were pulling it across overland on the railroad track.
We hiked in about a mile, and John was dragging our stuff on this little railroad type thing, and got in there, and as we were hiking into the cabin, I'm like, man, John, I heard something. I heard a bear. And he says, nah, you're just hearing things. I said, I don't know. I heard something down in the creek down there. I can hear some running around and some huffing and puffing. And sure enough, here was a mama bear and her little cub, and they were playing and catching fish and that. And so I was like, oh, okay, you guys just stay down there. We'll stay up here and mind our own business.
I didn't take into account when we were bear hunting there, it was in the spring and May, and now it was the fall, so the salmon were coming up the stream, and I did not think the bears would be in the streams. But even if I had known there was going to be bear in the streams, it would not have worried me, because bears fishing are not hungry bears.
I think it was kind of rainy. I think we had like about 15 minutes of sun. As soon as we got to the cabin, I remember sitting on the deck of the cabin, cute little cabin, and I thought, well, maybe it's going to get sunny and it'll be nice, and that we had like 3 nights to spend in this cabin. And the first night, John was so worried about the boat sinking because it was taking on water and the tide was coming in, and well, by that time it was going out, and we couldn't leave the boat in the water because it kept taking on water. So he must have taken 3 trips, hiked back down to the boat and back up to the cabin, and he'd say, now, Mary, I'm going to leave now, and so I want you to put up a bunch of all this furniture up against the door so that, I mean, just in case. And I'm like, well, who gets the gun? We had 1 gun. But, so it was kind of a sleepless night on that, and we ended up getting up early, and the weather wasn't great.
And listening to the radio, the seas were increasing and increasing to 2 to 2.5, up to 3-foot seas. And I was a little concerned about getting back, because I know what 2-foot seas are now with that boat. And of course the tide, once it goes out, it comes back in. And so I was worried about that, so I had periodically had to go down and check the boat, make sure I pulled it up and bailed it out. Then we decided, well, we were going to pull out the next morning, just because the seas were going to get worse over the days, and we had a small window to get through where the seas weren't going to be much over 2.5 feet. Well, one thing I forgot to do is I forgot that the tide does not come all the way back up, because it's receding tides as the days go on. So I had pulled the boat way up. Now the high tide did not come up to the boat anymore. And so how are we going to get the boat back down into the water? So we had to chop trees down, lift it up, put the trees underneath it, and slowly work our way down to the beach. But we did get down to the beach over time, and we got out of Oliver's Inlet, and it went fairly smooth going back compared to coming over. So we caught it just about right. I think it was more of a slack tide than when we had come over.
I guess I didn't know what to expect at the time, but I think the scariest thing was the water, was the ocean, the tides, and having a leaky boat. And I think if we would have had a better boat, I could have dealt with the rain and the bears and that type of thing. But not being sure, heck, what if we get stranded here? We did make it back to Juneau in one piece, and we had 1 fish, and I just thought to myself, well, if that's a honeymoon, remind me not to do a honeymoon again. We're going back this year, but we're not going to go to the cabin. We're going to go to a lodge and charter a boat and go out fishing and let them do the work. So we'll replay that as a honeymoon.